There is quite a number of different video games that I've wanted to cover since starting this channel, particularly older titles, and with the recent announcement of the upcoming Starship Troopers Extermination slated for next year, I've finally got a good excuse to talk about one that I've been wanting to cover for a while, that being the 2005 PC exclusive first-person shooter, Starship Troopers. It's a game that I've got a fair bit of nostalgia for, as I remember playing it back in high school on my first laptop that could barely run it and keep a steady frame rate. I also was quite a big fan of the movie the game was based on, the 1997 classic of the same name, which I probably shouldn't have been allowed to watch as a kid. And it's a film that featured some surprisingly decent CGI work for the time. There was also an animated series that aired when I was a kid called Roughnecks, which featured Reno Romano as Johnny Rico, a voice who you might recognize as Lewis from Resident Evil 4.
I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics too.
How rude!
Or you may remember him as the best Spider-Man voice from the PS1 games, you know, before Yuri Lowenthal came along.
Venom's ugly face on that big screen? Now that's scary.
That's not all. Rhino's on a rampage over at Omnitech as well.
What is this, the bad guy Olympics?
He was also in that Godzilla animated series too. I'm getting sidetracked.
Oops, wrong door.
I think a lot of what made that film so iconic, besides its commentary on neo-fascism, was the awesome creature design for the arachnid bugs and the massive swarms of them depicted in the film. And it's always struck me as a little odd that there haven't been many attempts to make Starship Troopers games over the years, as it really is perfect video game adaptation material. Compared to the Alien franchise, which pretty much gets a new game every 2 years, there's only been a small handful of games on PC, along with a couple mobile titles. We've had 2 real-time strategy games 20 years apart with Terran Ascendancy and Terran Command, the latter of which I've played a fair bit of, and the 2005 first-person shooter. The upcoming game Extermination is also a first-person shooter, with a strong multiplayer and co-op focus, and looks to be in a similar vein to recent horde shooters like World War Z, being able to build defenses and the like, and I'm fairly excited for it. I've been thinking for quite a while that a new shooter based on this series was due, as horde shooters have become pretty popular. I mean, just look at the success of the Earth Defense Force series, which is basically the same concept and incredibly fun to play with friends. To me, it's what kind of makes the 2005 Starship Troopers game fascinating in retrospect, as it was sort of a bit before its time and released at an odd moment in the industry. It was just after we had some pretty big titles in 2004 like Half-Life 2, Doom 3, Far Cry, and Halo 2, all of which showed big leaps in technology at the time. This was also before we started seeing games with massive enemy counts on screen, like with Dead Rising in 2006 and Left 4 Dead in 2007. The only thing similar I can think of was maybe the Serious Sam games at the time. Starship Troopers had a lot of ambition that it seems the technology of the time just wasn't quite ready to realise. Having said that, however, I'm also not going to sit here and pretend like this is some kind of forgotten masterpiece, because, well, it isn't. But let's take a look at it, shall we?
Come on, you ape! You want to live forever?
Starship Troopers was developed by a studio called Strangelight, who, before being acquired by Rebellion, had previously done a few PC ports for Empire Interactive, the publishing house responsible for one of my favourite racing games, Flat Out, which is another series I want to cover at some point. The game is loosely based off the events of the first 2 films and sees you playing as what's called a Marauder, a power armor wearing soldier that kind of seems like their answer to Master Chief from Halo. The thing that is pretty apparent very quickly is that these developers were obviously very passionate about the source material, and they've done a pretty good job capturing the look of the film for the time. The Swarm engine that this game uses doesn't look quite as good as Half-Life 2's Source engine or the id Tech 3 engine in Doom 3, but I still think it looks fairly good considering. The environments do capture the look of the film fairly well, and the weapons are clearly based on the mobile infantry weapons, right down to the rifle having a shotgun secondary fire. There are a few cool scripted sequences sprinkled throughout the levels where you see arachnids killing a helpless soldier, as well as moments that recreate scenes from the movies, and most of the soundtrack is taken from the film's original score. Then of course there's the bugs. The massive swarms of arachnids presented in the original film is some pretty iconic imagery, and This swarm engine makes a pretty valiant attempt at recreating that feeling from the film. In the second mission, you see this tech really being showcased as a gigantic swarm rains down on the tiny outpost you're defending, and it is pretty impressive considering the time this came out. And there is something quite cathartic about just shooting through hordes of those bugs, especially when you lob a grenade or fire a rocket into a group of them and see them explode into a shower of gibbed body parts. There was a drawback of having this many bugs on screen at once though, and maintaining a steady frame rate, and it's the animation work that suffers here. The movement of the bugs is pretty janky, and the death animations happen so quickly, like very few frames are used. But given what the developers were trying to pull off, it does make sense that this was a necessary compromise.
Carry on, Private.
There's only a handful of guns at your disposal in this game, but they get the job done for the most part and have different functions. Your first gun is the Marauder Rifle, which, because of future science, has unlimited ammo and works on a cooldown function, meaning it stops working if it overheats. This is your main go-to gun for the basic warrior arachnids, as long as you remember to have short, controlled bursts.
Remember, short, controlled bursts.
Then you have the MK rifle, which has 4 variants, each with a different attachment like a scope, grenade launcher, and shotgun blast, and is used against the stronger arachnids like the tiger bug and the spitters. You have a shotgun that looks a lot like the rifle in Mass Effect that is both awesome and kinda shit. It's amazing for crowd control with the warrior bugs, and you can collect groups of them in just a couple of shots, but it's extremely ineffective against anything else. It can take anywhere from 4 to 5 shots to kill a tiger bug with it, whereas the MK rifle makes much quicker work with them. Then there's a railgun, which you only get later in the campaign, and can kill tanker bugs in a few shots, as well as 2 different rocket launchers, one being a multi-missile launcher and the other being a mini nuke launcher. Most of the missions are pretty linear and simple in design, involving killing swarms and swarms of bugs, occasionally venturing off to reset generators for electric fences or setting up beacons. There are a few escort sections too, unfortunately, one with a PSYOP officer that just sounds like a right jerk.
Took your time. Now get to the control room and get that hangar open.
Why don't you crawl your fat ass down here and do it yourself?
As I said, this is not a masterpiece of any kind, but it is one of those situations where the source material is elevating and making everything much better than if it had just been an original IP. Like Aliens Fireteam Elite is much more fun because it uses that IP, and remember that Terminator Resistance game from 2019? That essentially played like a Fallout clone, but it was a pretty engrossing experience because it was set in the Terminator universe. So what I'm saying is that if you're a big fan of Starship Troopers, then that fact is going to make this game a lot more enjoyable for you, and possibly help you overlook some of the issues this game has.
What's going on? Why are there giant insects?
In a number of ways, time hasn't been kind to this game, as there are a number of odd design choices throughout that hamper the experience. One of my biggest grievances with the game is the level design, in that some of these levels are honestly just way too big and far too long. Some of the later campaign missions can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour to beat, providing that you don't die and have to restart the mission because, oh yeah, this game doesn't have fucking checkpoints.
We're all gonna die!
And a lot of this could have been fixed by just reducing the size of some of the areas and the distance you have to travel. Like, I get they want to convey a sense of scale to impress the player, but it just becomes annoying when you have to run for 5 minutes to reach objectives, especially when the mission has already been going for 40 minutes. Sometimes these objectives aren't exactly 100% clear to the player either. There are many instances where you're simply expected to just hold out against swarms of bugs, which is fine, but sometimes the bigger bugs like tankers or the plasmas will show up, and it isn't always clear whether you have to kill them in order to continue or not, as sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. Like one instance where the strongest bug in the game, a royal warrior, turned up and I spent like 20 minutes trying to kill this thing, when all I actually had to do was blast my way through this horde up a hill and into the next area. And it's with some of the other bug types where the frustration seeps its way into this game even more. Fighting the tankers and plasmas is initially quite cool and intimidating, until you realise that these things are really just bullet sponges until you get the better weapons near the end of the game. I mean, it takes about 50 missiles to take down a tanker, and you don't have this gun very often early in the campaign, making them more annoying to fight than anything else. Same with the rhino bugs, that are simple enough design-wise to fight, but when you combine that with being surrounded by 100 other bugs, it can get tiresome fast.
Rhino burgers coming up!
The mites that fire projectiles from a distance are annoying, but more so when you have to escort someone, as they're usually pretty hard to see. But they aren't that bad compared to the mini plasma bugs that you encounter a lot of in the interior areas, as these little things are really unbalanced. Even on easy difficulty, they can kill you in seconds if you don't take them out instantly, which is often hard to do on a first playthrough as you're not expecting them.
Sorry, buddy.
It's the Royal Warrior bugs that I found the most strangely designed, as they are literally invulnerable to all your big weapons. Yes, even the mini nuke launcher. The only way to kill these things is by using the MK rifle and shooting out their eyes on both sides of their face. You know, something easier said than done. And I don't recall being told in the game about this, besides a brief loading screen that I only saw for a few seconds. It's just a really odd design choice. Like, imagine if the Cyber Demon in Doom was invulnerable to the BFG and could only be killed by using the pistol and shooting it in the arse. It's all just unfortunate that these issues really start to rear their head into the experience as the campaign goes on, because it's really clear that these developers were big fans of the source material and this was definitely a passion project on their part. And if the novelty of killing swarms of bugs wore off before you even reached the final mission, I'm not entirely sure that I would blame you. Also, my copy of the game had an install bug where the final mission wouldn't actually load until I went into the directory and renamed one of the folders, which was kind of funny. Not quite as funny as the entire AI for the aliens, including the Marines, being ruined by a simple typo in the code.
So it was like a 7.5 game, which I think would have been fine for an aliens game.
It's pathetic.
If anything though, replaying through this Starship Troopers game, along with being a nostalgia trip, just made me a lot more excited for the upcoming Extermination game, as it's been over 15 years since this game came out, and the technology has increased so much that the ambition of this title I think can now finally be realised. This is also just a franchise, as I said, that is ripe for video game adaptation, and I'm glad we're starting to see that happen now in a big way. I definitely recommend checking out Terran Command on Steam, even if you're not a big RTS fan, because I've sunk some time into it and enjoy it quite a lot. With that all said, thanks for checking out my piece on Starship Troopers, and let me know in the comments if you also played this game back in the day, and if you're excited for Extermination. If you want to support the channel, remember to like and subscribe, and there's a link to my Patreon in the description. Until next time, stay safe out there, make sure to do your part, and I'll see you all in the next video.